Good safety morning. This is Brian Sunbach with OH&S Safety Consulting, here to talk to you today about the difference between a hazard and a risk, and to ask the question, is there a difference between a hazard and a risk? The answer is yes, there is a difference, because without a hazard, there is no risk. It doesn't exist. A hazard really does not have a measurement, whereas you can measure the risk associated to that hazard. And I'll demonstrate it in a short scenario. We have an 8-foot step ladder with a 10-pound sledge sitting on top of it. It's in an empty room. Nobody's in the room. It's the middle of the night. The doors are locked. Now, what's the likelihood that hammer could fall off the ladder? Very low. Okay, very low. Now, if it did, what would the severity be? Very minimal. Could maybe put a dent in the linoleum that could be repaired quite easily. Now let's change that scenario. We have the same ladder with the same hammer on it in the same room, but there's some conditions that have changed now. We have a room full of people and they're not wearing hard hats. What is the likelihood that somebody could bump into that that ladder and knock the hammer off? Very high. And if it did, what would the consequence be of a 10-pound sledge falling 2 feet and connecting with a skull without a hard hat on it? The significant damage could be done. In fact, you could end up with a cracked skull, potentially leading to a death. Therefore, very high severity and extreme likelihood that it can happen. R equals L times S. That's the formula for risk. Risk equals the likelihood times the severity. And each one of the scenarios I just gave you, in the first one, very low likelihood, extreme low severity, therefore the risk was very low. Whereas in the second scenario, the likelihood was very high and the severity was could potentially be the worst, death. Therefore the risk is very high. What we do with that information from a risk assessment, we've just done a risk assessment, one step of it anyway, is we take that information and we then translate it into a risk matrix. And a risk matrix can be a 3x3, a 4x4, or a 5x5, or even more, depending on the complexity of the operations that you're doing the assessment on. We'll talk about a risk matrix in my next video, which is a series of videos to talk about risk management as a whole. Thank you.